فارقب النصر المبين دولة الإسلام قامت بدماء الصادقين.
If you're anything like me, you've watched the news coming out of Iraq and Syria in a state of confused horror. Daesh, ISIL, ISIS, or simply the Islamic State seemed to appear out of nowhere, and even the media didn't know who they were, what they wanted, and what they believed. They couldn't even settle on what to call them. Instead, the focus was almost entirely on brutal executions, depicted in slick propaganda videos tailor-made for cable news. This video is an attempt to understand the group and find out what they want and why. First, to explain their motivations, we need to figure out what the Islamic State actually is. And the best way to understand them is as a fusion of three identities. The first is as an insurgent terrorist network. They began as Al-Qaeda in Iraq, led by Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, and despite their allegiance, their methods were quite different from the Al-Qaeda playbook. You can divide Islamic terrorists by who they target. The so-called near enemies, like the regimes of the Middle East, or far enemies, like the United States. Al-Qaeda targeted the far enemy to either force the US out of the Middle East or provoke a long, crippling guerrilla war like the one the Soviets fought in Afghanistan. The goal was to unite Muslims in a defensive jihad against a common enemy. But to bin Laden's displeasure, Zarqawi focused on the near enemy, attacking the majority Shia government, Shia populations, and Sunni collaborators. Instead of uniting Muslims, he believed a civil war between Sunni and Shia would rally Sunnis to the cause of jihad. But during what later became known as the Sunni Awakening, local Arab tribes eventually rejected these tactics and, with the help of coalition troops, forced AQI underground. After Zarqawi's death in a bombing raid, they united with several insurgent groups to form the Islamic State of Iraq. This rebranding was an attempt to regain local Sunni support, but it eventually came to redefine their second identity as a functional proto-state. US forces withdrew from Iraq in 2011, and instead of reconciling with the Sunni tribes, the Shia government began persecuting them for their initial support for the insurgency. Angry and disaffected, many turned back to groups like ISI, which had a new leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. He recruited criminals and radicals from the US-run prisons where he'd once been held, along with ex-members of Saddam Hussein's regime who had lost their jobs when the US disbanded the Iraqi military. Some were true believers in jihad, while others just wanted power, but they were all united by the goal of reviving a Sunni-dominated state, and they had the military, intelligence, and administrative skills to do it. In 2014, they exploited growing sectarian conflict in Iraq and civil war in Syria by seizing much of the Sunni heartland between the two countries. They collected taxes and provided public services in these territories, but claimed a heavy price. Dissent and un-Islamic behaviour were ruthlessly dealt with through grotesque executions and medieval punishments. These tactics had led to tribal uprisings just a few years earlier, but without the backing of US troops, it was far too dangerous to resist. The Islamic State of Iraq was living up to its name, fusing the remnants of Saddam's fallen government with Sunni nationalism and a militant jihadi ideology. In 2013, ISI became the Islamic State of Iraq and Al-Sham. That's the ancient name for Syria, also translated as the French word Levant, giving us ISIS and ISIL. But whichever name is used, the message was clear. They wanted to tear down the old colonial borders of the Middle East. A year later, Baghdadi added to the confusion with another rebrand, but this one was different. He renamed the group simply the Islamic State, but also proclaimed it to be a caliphate and dubbed himself the Caliph. Which brings us to the Islamic State's third identity, an apocalyptic death cult which combines the symbols of Islam's origins with doomsday prophecies to recruit and motivate followers from all over the world. IS follows an ultra-conservative form of Salafism, a Sunni movement which seeks to return to the original practices of Muhammad and his early followers. Muhammad was a preacher, a judge, a merchant, a general, and a political leader all at once, and the caliphates of Islam's early days followed this model, acting as supreme spiritual, political, and military authorities. Proclaiming a new caliphate harkens back to those early days of Islam and is a powerful symbol. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi took the first caliph's name and claims descent from Muhammad himself as a member of the Quraysh tribe. The last Ottoman caliph was abolished in 1924, which makes the establishment of a caliphate in the 21st century a revolutionary move. put IS in direct competition with Al-Qaeda as the stewards of Salafi jihadi Islam, and gave their calls to all Muslims for allegiance and support a sense of historical legitimacy. The appearance of a caliphate is also mentioned in prophecy as a harbinger of the apocalypse. IS believes that it heralds the arrival of the messianic saviour of Islam, the Mahdi, who will lead an army united under a black flag against the armies of Rome. Dabiq, a small Syrian town near the border of Turkey, will be the site of this showdown with the Crusader armies, which could be the Europeans, Americans, Russians, or even the Turks. They believe they're fated to lose that battle, at which point Jesus will join them in the fight, assuring them the final victory and a new caliphate which will span the entire globe. Not only is this fucking insane, it's actually very dangerous, because Western intervention and even the Islamic State's defeat could be viewed as a sign that the Day of Judgment is near, making it a powerful symbol for recruitment and motivation. With the upheavals of the Arab Spring, sectarian war tearing Iraq and Syria apart, and infidel bombs raining down from the sky, apocalyptic visions have become much easier to sell, and many jihadi groups around the world have abandoned the comparatively tame Al-Qaeda to pledge allegiance to IS. These groups are depicted as provinces of the global caliphate, but they're also a sign of IS decentralizing, as it comes under pressure in Iraq and Syria at the hands of Shia militia, the Syrian army, and Kurdish forces. But IS has been in this situation before, and it will probably survive by using its old tactics of returning to a terrorist insurgency and inciting the fears of Sunni Arabs under siege. The recent terrorist attacks throughout Europe, Asia, and the US, directed or inspired by IS, are themselves a shift to the old strategies of Al-Qaeda. They're partly a retaliation to bombing campaigns, but they also seek to lure the West into an apocalyptic ground war in the Middle East. In their online magazine, IS quotes George W. Bush.
Either you are with us, or you are with the terrorists.
Their attacks are a global extension of the civil war that they created in Iraq. They want to polarize Muslims around the world, forcing them to choose between the caliphate and the infidels. This is how the Islamic State operates. They create conflict and chaos and then thrive in the power vacuum. They may morph between their multiple identities, but their goal is still to unite the world's Muslims under one political, religious, and military authority, a pure Sunni caliphate, governed by their brutal interpretation of Islamic law in preparation for the end of days.